Empathy in one's 20s often makes a woman appear refined and dependable, but once she moves past the midpoint of her life, what begins to matter is no longer how others perceive her, but the quiet shift happening within. After too many years of being the emotional anchor, the one who regulates the atmosphere at home, who steadies a partner, who absorbs the tension in relationships that never truly held her in return, that same sensitivity starts to reveal another side. It was once a strength, yet it also functioned as a way to prevent conflict and to preserve a familiar role. The issue is not understanding others too deeply, but having tied self-worth to the obligation of being endlessly patient and agreeable, to the point where any unpleasant emotion, such as irritation, disappointment, or the desire to withdraw, was judged as wrong. Jung described this as identification with the persona, when the image of the mature, tolerant, generous woman hardens into a fixed frame for the entire identity. Everything that does not fit that frame, including the need to be respected and genuinely heard, is pushed into the shadow of the unconscious, only to return as prolonged exhaustion and quiet questions about fairness within relationships. It is precisely at the moment this imbalance becomes clear that an inner shift begins. A woman starts entering the Sophia stage. The Sophia stage is not a dramatic transformation, but a reordering of the inner structure, where empathy no longer arises from the fear of losing a familiar role, but from a steadier foundation. When there is no longer a need to prove oneself as the good one, understanding becomes more discerning and naturally bounded, and at that point, a deeper form of maturity begins to take shape, one that may never have been named before. Part 1. Why most empaths never reach the Sophia stage. To understand why most empaths never reach the threshold of Sophia, it is necessary to look back at the path they have walked for years without ever questioning it. Their empathy did not begin with some noble ideal of saving or sacrificing. It began with a nervous system that learned to read situations quickly in order to keep the surrounding environment stable. As children, the atmosphere at home could shift because of a single misplaced sentence, a tense glance, or the sound of a door shutting too hard. In that context, a child learned to observe before speaking, learned to adjust her emotions so that nothing would become more complicated than it already was. The body stored this pattern as a survival skill, and that skill matured along with her. When she entered adult relationships, that same skill was renamed with softer words such as sensitivity, tact, and emotional intelligence. In reality, it was still the old reflex. If someone seemed upset, she immediately tried to soothe. If someone felt disappointed, she instinctively took on part of the responsibility. When tension rose, she yielded first to avoid prolonged conflict. On the surface, these behaviors resembled love. Beneath them was a very specific fear. If she did not respond this way, what would happen? That fear was rarely spoken out loud, yet it guided her actions as steadily as a hidden gear turning under a table. Jung warned that the unconscious, when left unexamined, quietly governs a person's life. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When a woman believes she is simply someone who lives for others, while in truth she is repeating a strategy that once helped her feel safe, she does not realize she is being driven. She only notices that she often ends up in relationships where she gives more than she receives, and she explains it away by saying she is too sensitive or too responsible. From that mechanism, a habit forms. Connection becomes synonymous with constant availability. If someone needs her, she responds. If someone is sad, she listens. If someone is angry, she works to calm them. The emotional door stays open all day without a lock, because closing it would trigger guilt. In the workplace, this pattern is easy to see. The empath is often the one who rephrases a colleague's words to avoid misunderstanding, who takes on extra tasks when the team is overwhelmed, and who replies to messages after hours, so no one has to wait. She is considered reliable, yet that reliability is sometimes built on her willingness to exceed her own limits. At some point, she realizes she is sought out because she is convenient and easy, not necessarily because her personal worth is deeply respected. Within the family, the role becomes even more subtle. She turns into the emotional regulator, the one who adjusts the overall temperature so nothing explodes. When others are heated, she lowers her voice. When conflict arises, she stands in the middle. Over time, she grows accustomed to absorbing other people's tension as if it were her default responsibility. This can make her feel important, but it also leaves her tired in ways that are difficult to articulate. Sensitivity is a refined capacity, but when it is tied to the task of scanning for danger, it becomes a radar that never shuts off. Instead of living fully in the present, she constantly scans for the possibility of conflict, disappointment, or rupture. A person who is always scanning rarely experiences true rest. She apologizes quickly because apologizing once proved to be the fastest way to reduce tension. She braces herself because bracing once prevented worse consequences. Gradually, that bracing becomes her baseline state. What makes her easy to manipulate is not weakness, but the clear signal she sends. She will stay longer than necessary to prevent things from turning ugly. Others perceive this sooner than she expects. Compliments such as, "Only you understand me," or "Everything feels calmer because of you," sound like appreciation, yet they also place an unspoken obligation on her shoulders. When self-worth becomes tied to being needed, another person's dependence can easily be mistaken for deep affection. Feeling needed confirms that she matters, and so she agrees to pay the price in time, energy, and postponed personal desires. At a deeper level lies an old belief: if she is good enough, patient enough, generous enough, she will not be abandoned. This belief did not appear overnight. It was built over years of trying to maintain stability in her environment. As long as this belief remains unexamined, every new relationship becomes another variation of the same pattern. She continues to stay, to fix, to adjust herself, and she calls it love or responsibility. Because this mechanism has operated for so long and so smoothly, most empaths stop just before the threshold of the Sophia stage. Entering Sophia requires separating kindness from fear and distinguishing understanding from self-abandonment. As long as empathy is tied to maintaining safety within a relationship, it will be used as a tool to preserve stability rather than as a conscious choice. Only by facing this structure directly does a woman gain the chance to step out of the old loop. That is why the Sophia stage is rare, not because it is mystical or unreachable, but because it demands a level of honesty with oneself that not everyone is ready to confront. Part 2. The Kind Person Mask. The trap before the Sophia stage can begin. The next point of stagnation does not lie in giving too much, but in the fact that the image of the good woman has become the pillar of identity. The empath's persona is not crude or fake. It is refined, carefully maintained, and socially rewarded. It is the image of a woman who is reasonable, undemanding, calm, and composed. Because that image brings affection and a sense of belonging, it slowly stops being a role and becomes an identity. Jung described the persona as a necessary mask for functioning in society, but when the mask adheres too tightly to the skin, a person begins to believe it is the real face. The shift off-center begins with something subtle in decision-making. Instead of asking, "Do I truly want this?" the question becomes, "Should I do this?" When action is guided by "should," external standards have replaced the inner voice. It sounds mature and responsible, yet psychologically, it marks a movement away from freedom and toward adaptation. The woman no longer acts from an authentic feeling, but from the image she feels compelled to maintain. Once the persona of the good woman has been reinforced long enough, emotions that do not fit the image start to feel threatening. Anger is labeled as a lack of generosity. Exhaustion is seen as weakness. The desire to stop is interpreted as selfishness. Rather than allowing those emotions to exist, she learns to reinterpret them in ways that remain acceptable. Pain is translated into empathy. Frustration is turned into silence. The urge to leave becomes another chance for someone else. She does not say directly that she feels hurt. Instead, she explains the other person's circumstances so that her image remains intact. Claire is a woman in her mid-40s who works in an office where she is known as the peacemaker. When her supervisor assigns extra work at the last minute, she smiles and accepts it, even though she is already overwhelmed. When a colleague makes a mistake, she quietly fixes it to avoid embarrassment. One day, when asked why she never refuses, she says she does not want to create tension. Here, the persona has done its job almost too well. Claire is so identified with her social mask that she can no longer clearly distinguish between her true nature and the role she performs. That mask is like a glossy coat of paint over a surface, making everything appear smooth and agreeable. Yet the thicker the paint, the more the cracks underneath are concealed. She explains her boundaries at length so no one feels rejected. She apologizes before saying something uncomfortable. She rationalizes situations that, in truth, should not be accepted. Each time she does this, she trades a piece of her truth to preserve a consistent image. The persona resembles a white garment that must remain spotless. When a small stain appears in the form of irritation or doubt, the immediate reaction is to scrub it away. The problem is that too much scrubbing thins the fabric. Jung observed that when the persona becomes overdeveloped, the shadow is pushed downward and gathers energy. What is repressed does not disappear. It waits for an opportunity to surface as tension, loss of motivation, or a vague emptiness without a clear cause. The greatest confusion created by the persona is the confusion between calmness and numbness, between kindness and silent endurance. She believes she is maintaining balance, yet in reality, she is avoiding conflict with herself. When hurt, the first question is not, "What do I need to feel respected?" but, "What is the other person going through?" That question reflects compassion, yet it also keeps her outside the center of her own life. What makes the Sophia stage seem distant is not that it demands something extraordinary, but that it requires facing the very mask that has sustained her for years. She must acknowledge that the image of the good woman is not the entirety of her nature, but a structure built for acceptance. To admit that is to accept the risk that others may see her differently, and the fear of losing one's position in the eyes of others is often the strongest force holding her in place. As long as the persona remains the foundation of self-worth, the empath will continue to confuse being loved for who she is with being valued for the role she performs. This is the crucial point of stagnation before Sophia can begin, because Sophia calls for integration, not performance. Only when the mask is recognized for what it truly is can she set it down without feeling that she herself is disappearing. And that movement, though quiet, is one of the most courageous steps in the kind of psychological maturation Jung described. Part 3. The cost of avoiding shadow integration, exhaustion as an ignored signal. The shadow of an empath is not cruelty or selfishness, as the woman once feared. It is made up of very ordinary rights that were once labeled as unacceptable. The right to say no without offering a long explanation. The right to feel irritated when a boundary is crossed. The right to prioritize one's own needs. The right to withdraw when it has simply been too much. When these rights are repeatedly suppressed to preserve a pleasing image, psychological energy does not disappear. It accumulates. Jung emphasized that what is repressed returns in another form. What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size. When the darkness is not acknowledged, it does not weaken. It grows quietly. At first, the signs are subtle. The woman begins to feel tired for long stretches, even when she is not objectively overworked. A slight irritability appears around things she once brushed off easily. A kind of sadness slips in at the end of the day without a clear reason. Because there is no dramatic event to explain it, she assumes it is temporary stress. In reality, it is the cost of living too long in the role of emotional regulator for others. She has mistaken sensitivity for an obligation to endure, mistaken noticing a problem for the duty to fix it, and mistaken understanding for the responsibility to forgive. Each time she makes that confusion, she quietly places more weight on her own shoulders. Hypervigilance deepens the exhaustion. The woman hears a sigh and immediately begins to interpret it. She sees a short message and assumes a shift in mood. She detects a slight change in tone and rushes to smooth things over before anyone clearly states that something is wrong. This entire process happens so quickly that she does not even realize she is living in a constant state of anticipation. When she goes out to dinner with friends, one person's silence is enough to drain her enjoyment. She subtly redirects the conversation to keep the atmosphere balanced. The evening ends without incident, yet she returns home feeling depleted, as if she has run a marathon. What exhausts her is not the dinner itself, but the invisible role of managing emotional rhythm throughout it. A fitting image for this state is a sponge left soaking in water for too long. At first, its ability to absorb is useful, but when it is never wrung out, it grows heavy and begins to deteriorate from the inside. The woman can no longer distinguish which emotions are her own and which she has absorbed from others. When she is alone, she feels an unexpected emptiness because she has long been immersed in the shared current of other people's feelings. Without anyone to adjust or stabilize, the internal space becomes unmistakably clear. Emily, 43, illustrates this process. For years, she has been the connector in her group of friends. When one friend went through a divorce, Emily listened for hours. When another struggled financially, Emily searched for practical solutions. She absorbed every story, every crisis, every emotional surge as if it were natural. But without the chance to wring herself out, the absorption became weight. Over time, Emily noticed she was increasingly irritable toward the very people she once supported wholeheartedly. She panicked and concluded that she had become selfish. In reality, this was not a moral decline. It was Emily's shadow demanding recognition. The part that wanted rest, the part that no longer wanted to function as the emotional coordinator, finally found a voice after years of being held back. This kind of exhaustion does not resolve with a few days off, because what needs to change is not simply routine, but psychological structure. As long as the role remains intact, energy continues to drain. The woman may become forgetful, unfocused, or prone to minor illnesses because her nervous system has been bracing for too long. The body reflects what the psyche has tried to conceal. As a guitar string is pulled tight without pause, it does not snap immediately, but it gradually loses resilience. Another sign is a quiet envy toward those who speak directly and refuse without apology. The woman does not want to create conflict, yet she longs for the freedom of living without constant permission. The empath's shadow often contains a healthy form of coldness, the capacity to close the door when necessary. But fearing the label of cold, she leaves the door open too long, and the draft eventually chills her from within. In Jung's framework, this is the stage where the darkness refuses to remain hidden. It resembles water blocked at one gate that eventually forces its way through the weakest point. If not consciously integrated, it may emerge as sudden outbursts, unexpected detachment, or painful breaks. Exhaustion, then, is not a sign of failure. It is a signal that the old structure no longer fits. And this prolonged depletion creates a breaking point, a moment when the woman is compelled to look at herself honestly. From that fracture, pain begins to transform into something clearer. The realization that life cannot continue based on self-erasure. Part 4. The turning point, when pain becomes awareness of unconscious patterns. The turning point rarely looks like a dramatic crisis. It usually arrives in a situation so familiar that the woman can predict each sentence before it is spoken. A friend repeats the same old story with no real intention of changing. A family member once again treats her sacrifice as something natural and expected. A conversation circles everyone else's needs, while no one thinks to ask what she actually wants. The difference this time is not in the circumstances, but in the fact that something inside no longer has the energy to continue the familiar role. The automatic feeling of "I'm fine" does not show up on cue anymore. At this point, her sensitivity is still intact, but her body no longer cooperates with enduring more. Intuition begins to send a different signal. It is no longer focused solely on keeping the peace. It shifts toward protecting inner integrity. This is a crucial movement. When the nervous system no longer sides with the role, the woman starts to sense a truth that is difficult to avoid. She keeps encountering the same type of dynamic in her relationships. Recognizing this pattern becomes the turning point. Before, similar experiences were labeled as bad luck or as a result of being too sensitive. Afterward, they are seen as a recurring structure in which she herself has played a part. From this awareness, the turning point truly reveals itself. It is not loud, but it changes the entire perspective. The breaking point is like a guitar string pulled too tight for too long. It does not snap violently, it simply goes slack. The sound turns dull, and the player realizes the problem was never the song, but the way the string had been tightened from the start. The woman may still be doing what is considered kind, yet inside, there is no life left in it. The correct actions continue, but the emptiness that accompanies them makes everything feel artificial. It is the moment she realizes she is continuing a familiar script she no longer believes in. Sarah, 45, began to see this after many years of being the bridge in both family and work. Sarah was always the one who explained on behalf of others in every team. When there was conflict, Sarah mediated. When there was a mistake, Sarah automatically fixed it, so no one would be blamed. Over time, Sarah noticed she was repeating this role in every environment, from home to the office. After receiving counseling, Sarah understood that she had unconsciously identified with the persona of the peacemaker and avoided her shadow, which included the right to let others carry their own responsibility. The moment Sarah saw this pattern clearly, the feeling of being toyed with by fate shifted into the understanding that her own reflexes had been maintaining the loop. The breaking point is also when the woman stops believing that if she endures enough, things will eventually change. Reality is often simpler and harder to accept. People grow accustomed to her responses and rarely change without a reason. Once she understands this, she stops waiting for a perfect apology to feel restored. Not because recognition no longer matters, but because she sees that clarity does not come from the other person. It comes from looking directly at the structure she has been participating in. Clarity appears like turning on a light in a storage room that has not been opened for years. Old boxes become visible with clear labels: fear of being disliked, fear of abandonment, fear of losing one's place. Before, these labels operated silently. Now they are named. When a belief is seen, it loses part of its absolute power. Fate begins to change its meaning. What was once called destiny becomes a lesson repeated until it is understood. The breaking point does not immediately bring confidence or peace. It brings truth. The woman may feel embarrassed when looking back at how much she endured, but if she does not use that feeling to attack herself, it can become the foundation of self-respect. From here, a new question arises, no longer directed outward but inward. If she does not continue the old role, who is she? That question opens the door to the next stage, where the parts once pushed down must be consciously reclaimed. A fateful moment, then, is not an external event, but a shift in perception. When a woman recognizes her unconscious pattern, the capacity to choose begins to form. This step is necessary to move closer to the Sophia stage, because only when the loop is seen can it be broken. If in your own journey there has been a moment when a familiar situation suddenly felt impossible to continue in the same way, it may not have been weakness, but the beginning of awakening. And if this resonates with something personal, sharing your reflection or experience may help someone else realize they are not alone in that decisive moment. Part 5. Shadow integration, where the empath becomes dangerous. But recognizing the pattern is only the doorway, not the real transformation. The shift begins when a woman stops trying to eliminate the darker part of herself and starts facing it directly. Shadow integration is not about becoming sharp or aggressive. It is about acknowledging that there has always been a firm capacity within her, a decisive edge, a part that can say enough without collapsing. When this part is denied, it does not disappear. It leaks out as bitterness, as quiet sarcasm, as passive distance. When it is acknowledged, it becomes the internal structure that supports her gentleness. The shadow of an empath is not malice. It is the set of rights that were once forbidden, the right not to over-explain, the right not to participate in every crisis, the right to prioritize her own stability, the right to let others take responsibility for their emotions. In the past, whenever anger surfaced, a woman like this would censor herself and remind herself to be more understanding, more compassionate. But during integration, anger is no longer treated as an enemy. It is recognized as a boundary signal. If the body reacts, it means something has gone too far. Jung once said, "No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." A tree cannot rise if its roots do not reach deep into the soil. In the same way, a woman cannot become whole if she lives only from her light. when the shadow is acknowledged, softness does not disappear, but it is no longer fragile. The heart develops a spine. Empathy remains, but it no longer collapses under every demand. A subtle but clear change begins to show in daily life. She no longer feels the need to offer long explanations when she declines something. Instead of presenting a detailed chain of reasons to make others comfortable, her response becomes brief and sufficient. The possibility of being misunderstood may still be there, but it no longer terrifies her. The need to be immediately understood is no longer the condition for feeling worthy. Silence is no longer avoidance. It becomes a conscious decision not to betray herself. This shift is not theoretical. It appears in familiar situations where old reflexes once ruled. Rebecca, 47, had always stepped in to solve everything, from financial issues to family conflicts. After reading Jung's work on the shadow, she realized that the cold part of her, the part that wanted to say no and step back, had never been allowed to exist. One day, when her family expected her to take on yet another burden, Rebecca simply said she could not do it. There was no long justification. She later endured being seen as different. In Jungian terms, that was the moment Rebecca began integrating her shadow, instead of remaining identified with the persona of the self-sacrificing daughter. Integrating the shadow also means stopping the projection of moral purity onto others. When a woman sees within herself the capacity to control, to avoid, even to manipulate, she becomes less naive about those same tendencies in others. This awareness does not destroy trust. It makes trust conditional and conscious. An empath who has faced her own shadow is no longer overwhelmed by someone else's discomfort because she understands how emotional mechanisms operate. Guilt stops being an easy leash once she can recognize when it is being intentionally activated. Another way to understand this process is to imagine adding a steel frame to a wooden house. The house remains warm, but it no longer shakes at every storm. Integrated darkness does not make a woman cold. It makes her whole. Light and shadow together create depth. Once she has seen and accepted her darker parts, she no longer needs to perform the role of the one who understands everything. She only needs to understand enough not to walk willingly into situations that drain her. This change may provoke reactions. Statements like, "You've changed," or "You're not the same anymore," often surface as attempts to pull her back into the previous position. But once the shadow has been integrated, those words do not destabilize her internal structure. She does not need to prove that she is still good. Her value is no longer dependent on being perceived as agreeable. This is where the dangerous empath emerges. Dangerous not because she harms, but because she is no longer easily steered by guilt or fear. When the internal strings are cut, no one can pull her back into old patterns using familiar emotional triggers. Empathy does not disappear. It simply stops being unconditional absorption. It becomes a conscious choice. Shadow integration, then, is not dramatic. It is a restructuring from within. When the darker parts are brought into the light, she does not become rigid. She becomes steady. Her heart remains open, but it no longer opens by reflex. Her gentleness remains, but it is no longer confused with self-erasure. And from this foundation, a different form of empathy can finally emerge, one guided not by compulsion, but by awareness. Part 6. When empathy matures into discernment, intuition no longer serving approval. Before this maturation, a woman would walk into a space and immediately stick to its atmosphere. If the meeting room was tense, her body tightened with it. If someone at a family dinner was irritated, her mood would automatically sink. Other people's emotions went straight into her nervous system without any filtering. After the shift, she still senses all of it, but the experience stops at awareness. She notices the shift in energy, yet she no longer assumes she has to intervene. The emotion does not flow directly into her identity. It is observed, named, and placed where it belongs. The difference lies in a series of very simple but directional questions. Is this emotion actually mine? Do I truly need to respond right now? If I do nothing, what will reveal itself? These questions create a gap between stimulus and action. In that gap, choice appears. Immature empathy often functions like an overly sensitive smoke detector. The smallest signal triggers a reaction. Mature empathy is more like a lighthouse. It scans the sky and the sea, but it does not jump into the water every time it sees a wave. The woman still reads hesitation in someone's voice, the unusual delay in a message, the mismatch between a promise and a behavior. But she no longer reads in order to anticipate and please. She reads to answer a different question. Should I remain in this rhythm or not? A brief example makes this clearer. During a gathering, a colleague makes a half-joking, half-cutting remark about her competence. In the past, she might have laughed it off or over-explained to prove she meant no harm. This time she pauses and asks directly, "What are you trying to say?" There is no anger and no justification. The question places responsibility back where it belongs. If the comment was careless, it will be corrected. If it was intentional, the discomfort will surface on its own. The silence in that moment becomes a test. Discernment also shows up in the speed of response. In the past, quick replies were considered kind. Now she understands that rushing to respond is sometimes just fear of being disliked. So she deliberately slows the pace. When someone pressures her with a question like, "So what do you want now?" she no longer lets herself be cornered into an immediate decision. Asking for time is not avoidance, it is protection of clarity. Slowing down is like easing off the gas before a curve, not because she cannot drive, but because she intends to continue safely. Another shift appears in how she evaluates inconsistency. She begins to trust actions more than words. If someone claims to respect boundaries, yet repeatedly crosses them, the real data lies in behavior. It is like trusting the direction of the wind rather than the forecast. This sobriety allows relationships to be seen as they are, not as they are promised to be. Discernment is also the ability to let silence function as a test. A genuinely decent person will step forward clearly without being prompted. Someone inclined toward manipulation will grow uncomfortable when the stage disappears. When she stops supplying fuel for drama, the drama weakens on its own. She realizes that reactivity used to be a lever others could pull. Once she stops responding to the pull, the old structure no longer works. The danger at this stage does not lie in confrontation, but in steadiness. She no longer takes responsibility for other people's emotional states. If someone feels upset because a boundary has been set, that sadness is acknowledged but not carried. Empathy is still present, yet it is regulated, like opening a valve only as much as needed. She no longer opens it fully out of fear of being called selfish. From here, love becomes structured. Caring for others means no longer feeding their unconscious patterns. Not every request must be fulfilled to prove affection. Not every conflict must be resolved immediately. When empathy matures into discernment, intuition is no longer a tool for pleasing. It becomes a compass for positioning herself within a relationship. And once she grows accustomed to choosing when to engage and when to step back, a natural consequence follows. It is impossible to maintain discernment while continuing to play the rescuer. When she clearly sees her own rhythm and the rhythm of others, stepping into every crisis no longer makes sense. From that point on, an old identity begins to crack. That crack is not a loss. It is a sign of a new layer of maturity, where empathy is no longer a survival reflex, but a conscious capacity. Part 7. The death of the rescuer identity, the final threshold before the Sophia stage. The rescuer identity does not form in a single day. It grows quietly, like a framework assembled piece by piece from the moments a woman is praised for being understanding, for being reasonable, for being the only one who can keep everything from falling apart. Each time she steps in to fix a problem, each time she cleans up the consequences for someone else, each time she swallows her own reaction so things stay smooth, another beam is added to that structure. Over time, the structure becomes an identity. The woman does not just rescue, she believes she is the rescuer. That is why when she begins to stop, the first feeling is not relief, but disorientation. If no one needs her to handle things, if there are no more late-night calls asking for help, if she is no longer the mediator in every conflict, then where does her value stand? The question is not loud, but it touches something very real. For years, her sense of place has been built on being needed. Jung called the deepest process of growth individuation, the separation from old identifications in order to reach the true self. This is not self-development in a superficial sense. It requires a woman to face the truth that constant rescuing is not always pure selflessness. Sometimes it is also fear of emptiness. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. When she is no longer busy with other people's problems, the inner space appears, and that space must be lived with. It cannot continue to be covered by usefulness. The rescuer identity once carried a strong sense of meaning. When someone came in crisis, she felt important. When she solved the issue, recognition followed like a reward. But meaning built on a conditional role always carries dependency. If others no longer need her, the structure trembles. And this subtle dependency makes letting go of the role far more difficult than setting a boundary. At this threshold, she begins practicing a different kind of discipline, listening without immediately offering solutions, staying present without taking over someone else's growth. When a family member calls asking her to handle a consequence they created, her answer may simply be, "This time, you handle it. No lecture, no blame." Afterward, a wave of guilt moves through her body. That wave once would have been strong enough to pull her back. Now it is seen for what it is, a passing emotional state, like a brief storm, not a moral verdict. Hannah's story makes this clearer. At 46, Hannah had always been the one solving problems for the entire family. When her brother fell into debt, she negotiated. When her mother fought with someone, she restored peace. After reading about Jung's concepts of projection and the shadow, Hannah realized she was not only rescuing others, but avoiding her own emptiness. One day, when her brother asked her to intervene again, she refused. No long explanation, only that he needed to take responsibility. The weeks that followed were uncomfortable, but in that space, Hannah began building a life that did not revolve around putting out other people's fires. The difference between helping and rescuing becomes unmistakable at this stage. Helping means offering tools and trusting the other person to use them. Rescuing means carrying them through every obstacle. If carried too long, both grow exhausted. The one being carried never learns to walk. The one carrying loses strength. When the rescuer identity dies, The woman allows others to pay their own tuition. Small failures are no longer emergencies that must be prevented at all costs. Another shift appears as well. She begins to see that some people do not truly want solutions. They want someone willing to endure on their behalf. When she stops signing up for that role, discomfort from them is predictable. Phrases like, "You've changed," begin to surface. But the change is not coldness. The change is no longer selling energy cheaply in exchange for feeling loved. The death of the rescuer identity also opens another demand: building a personal life that does not depend on being needed. New habits form. Personal projects take shape. Relationships become more balanced. Her sense of worth gradually separates from her function in other people's lives. At first, this feels unfamiliar, even empty. Yet that very emptiness is the space where a different identity can mature. Love does not diminish in this phase. It changes structure. It is no longer being there at all times, but being there at the right time. It is no longer carrying someone through, but trusting they can stand. Love gains bones. It gains weight. It is no longer blown away by the winds of guilt or pressure. And when the rescuer identity truly closes, the woman stands before a clear threshold. The question is no longer whether she is an empath. The question becomes whether she dares to live without needing to be needed. This is the final threshold before the Sophia stage, because only when the rescuer role ends does empathy become fully free. At that point, compassion is no longer an obligation or a mask to defend. It becomes a conscious capacity. And it is there that the empath steps into a rare form of maturity, where love is no longer sacrifice, but a steady and deliberate choice. Sophia's stage does not make a woman love less. It gently ends the habit of loving by leaving herself out of the equation. Love is no longer used to keep others from leaving, nor is it used to prove worth. It becomes a current with banks. Still warm, but no longer sweeping her away. Still understanding, but no longer automatically carrying what is not hers to carry. There may be days when she notices she speaks less than before. She no longer rushes to explain. She no longer feels responsible for fixing the atmosphere every time it shifts. She no longer feels the need to make sure everyone understands that she is good. This change can easily be mistaken for coldness. In truth, it is when her inner world begins to stand upright, not hardened, but properly aligned. If calm is replacing the constant strain, if intuition is no longer used to please, but to protect what is true inside, this may not be a loss. It may be a return to her original proportion, where kindness is no longer tied to self-erasure. In the end, only one question remains to be answered honestly. Is she willing to let certain relationships change, even fall away, to preserve the most important relationship of all, the one with herself? If this journey reflects a part of your own experience, press like to support the channel, and subscribe to continue exploring the inner world through the lens of Carl Jung.